York, Lee Zeldin. I'm also very pleased to have with us today his running mate and true partner in this campaign, the next Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York, Allison Esposito. They've been working tirelessly, crisscrossing the state to earn the votes of New Yorkers, and their frequent visits here to Western New York just show how dedicated they are to the entirety of New York State. And we're here today to talk about a very serious issue and one of the cornerstones of Lee's candidacy, and that is our very broken bail laws. We've been sounding the alarm on this since they took effect in early 2020. And our brave men and women in law enforcement, they were warning us what would happen if you repealed bail laws and you took away a judge's ability to remand people who are a danger to themselves and to others. And I'm so happy that Allison is here with us today, because as a decorated member of the NYPD, no one can speak to the realities and the impact of these laws that Allison can. She spent her career on the front lines keeping people safe, and she's come face to face with evil in the streets. She's held the hands of crime victims as their lives have been forever changed. Every New Yorker has to ask themselves, what kind of society are we if we are not safe and if we are not taking care of our citizens? If our laws are stacked in favor of criminals over the law-abiding citizen, if the people who risk their lives to protect us have their hands tied, if the victims watch their perpetrators suffer no consequences while they are left to pick up the pieces of their lives. Day after day, we wake up to awful stories of dangerous criminals, many of them career and repeat offenders. They wreak havoc on our communities. This is a widespread problem. It's not just downstate. So we have to dismiss it. This is not just a New York City problem. This is all New York problem. Whether you're in a small village in Erie County or you're in a rural territory in the southern tier, it's a serious problem for New Yorkers everywhere. And this week we learned of a horrific story of a Hamburg man who has a decades-long history of violence against women, and he struck again. This man has been arrested more than a dozen times. He served 2 prison sentences over the last 20 years for horrific violent assaults, rape, and kidnapping 2 women, one his ex-wife and one a former girlfriend. He brutally kicked his ex-wife wearing steel-toe boots, rupturing her spleen. She said she suffered regular beatings by him. He broke the jaw of his ex-girlfriend, and he stabbed her with an ice pick. And he kidnapped her in the trunk of his car and drove from Chautauqua County to Ohio. He then proceeded to rape her on a secluded road. 6 months after being released from prison, he began stalking and harassing an ex-girlfriend. He was arrested and charged and released without bail. And even after the arrest, he violated the order of protection and was charged yet again. And he remained out of jail again. And what did he do with his freedom? He kidnapped and he raped another woman. This is just wrong, folks. This is just wrong. The system of justice has failed those victims. A judge could have clearly looked at this history and he knew what the outcome would be. It would be obvious to a judge if they had that power. You didn't need a crystal ball. The judge was powerless to hold him because they had no discretion for a dangerousness standard. My heart and all of our hearts ache for these victims whose lives will never, ever be the same after these crimes. And Kathy Hochul and the radical leftists in the legislature, they just turn the other cheek. This is a system that they created and that we are forced to live with as law-abiding New Yorkers. And it's they that are perfectly fine with this system, and they dismiss any scrutiny. When Kathy Hochul was asked about law enforcement's concerns about the bail law, she said they were overblown and that we were blowing dog whistles. She rides around with an armed police detail at all times in her private jet or her private helicopter that you pay for, while regular New Yorkers, they're left defenseless by a failed and broken system. It is absolutely infuriating. And it needs to change this November, and it can change this November. Let me say this as explicitly as possible. Kathy Hochul will never repeal bail reform. There's only one person that will do it. He's standing right next to me. Lee Zeldin will repeal bail reform. This election is very clear in your choice if this is an important matter to you. And if it's not an important matter, you need to wake up. Lee Zeldin and Allison Esposito will restore safety in our communities, no matter how urban, suburban, or rural they are. They care about citizens no matter where they come from in this state. They will restore common sense to our broken government. They will repeal this god-awful law that is destroying lives everywhere. Every voter has the power to stop this. Our leaders have failed these victims. You can stand up for them with your vote this November. You can say enough is enough. We don't have to deal with it this way anymore. Be their champion. They need someone to stand up for them. Lee's standing up for them. Allison standing up for them. My friend Joe Pinion standing up for them. I'm standing up for them. But they need you too. Every average citizen that says they don't have a voice, they don't have any power, they need to get off the couch and go vote for change to make that change happen. Make that change a reality. Because the politicians in power in this state with one-party Democratic rule, they take it all for granted. They think it's all just mailed in already. That they've got this thing cooked, they just got to ride it out. But people of all party affiliations can make the difference. You don't have to vote that letter next to your name on the registration card. Vote for, again, stop voting against your own best interest. Stand up and say, let's go save this state. Let's go give a voice to the victims in this state. This is our only shot. I don't care if you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're an independent. As human beings, we know that this is wrong and that it's got to change. And there's only one way to do it, and that's to change governors of the state of New York. So please use your voice and stand up and stop this madness this year. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and our next governor, Lee Zeldin.
Thank you. This case is as sickening and gut-wrenching as it gets. When you decide to run for office, if you serve an elected office, you're a candidate, especially in a big state like New York, you spend a lot of time on the road. I lost count of how many dozens of times I've been to Buffalo and Erie County throughout this campaign. And I look forward to coming back over and over and over again. This morning was the start of my daughter's 11th grade year. They're turning 16 in 4 weeks. And it's a sacrifice on the part of our family when we run, but it's worth it. If we weren't taking on this challenge of running, and for myself, for Allison and Joe, the three of us left positions that we enjoyed serving in to be all in on this challenge to save our state. It's a sacrifice for our family, but it's worth it. I wouldn't be here with all of you this morning. I've asked the governor to finish a sentence, a very basic request. New York leads the entire nation in population loss because. Now, I know the answer to that. I'd like to hear the governor answer that. I believe that the reason why New York leads the entire nation in population loss is because people are hitting their breaking point in the state, and they feel like their safety, their wallets, their freedom are under attack, so they decide to leave. They believe that if they go to another state, that their money will go further, they'll feel safer, they'll live life freer. That's why New York leads the entire nation in population loss. We all have an opportunity right now. It's September 1st. There's an election coming up November 8th. We can all do our part. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. This is about us as New Yorkers to fix this state, to save this state. When you look through the facts of this particular case, where Saracena gets arrested in February, the judge does not have discretion to keep Saracena behind bars. There's no discretion. So when we say we need to repeal cashless bail and give judges discretion to weigh dangerousness and flight risk and past criminal record and seriousness of the offense, look at this case. The judge in February had zero discretion whatsoever to keep this person behind bars. A mandatory cashless bail release. Now, if the February incidents never take place, then maybe the conversation is a bit different. The person gets released about a year ago and he commits this rape. And you look back, and as far as the justice system goes, law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, there isn't the same opportunity as we have right here where the system could work and prevent a rape. I want to fix the system, and we have the ideas to do it, that would have prevented this rape from taking place. When Kathy Hochul says that there's no data to support our call to overhaul cashless bail, we think about individual cases where people have lost their lives at the hands of someone who was released on cashless bail. And any one of these stories is enough data to justify action. The family of 93-year-old Connie Torrey in Syracuse, she was murdered by somebody released on cashless bail. In Westchester, somebody was arrested on a double manslaughter in Yonkers. The person who committed that offense was released on cashless bail for an arson. In July, there was a case where two Mexican cartel drug smugglers were busted with $1.2 million worth of crystal meth. Think of how many people that can kill. Instantly released on cashless bail. Now, if somebody who advocates for cashless bail wants to make the argument that if you are not a danger, it's a low-level offense, you're not a flight risk, you have a past clean record, and the only reason why you would be stuck behind bars is because you cannot afford $100. That's why we're talking about judges having discretion. And this is just one of many issues related to the state and the criminal justice system. Yeah, we need our district attorneys doing their job. Yeah, we need all judges enforcing the law. Absolutely. But this is a case that highlights exactly why judges in every single case should have the ability to keep somebody behind bars when they assess that in that case, that person is a danger to society. And it's not just Republicans who are calling for this. The mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, I served with him in the state senate for 4 years. He says that the state legislature and governor should have a special session to overhaul cashless bail and add a dangerousness standard. I agree. That can happen right now. You look at the coverage coming out of Buffalo on this case involving one criminal. And there's your data. Allison Esposito served 25 years in the NYPD. Her father was an NYPD chief. Allison would have become an NYPD chief. She wanted to not just follow in her father's footsteps, but was going to outrank him soon enough in the NYPD. And she retired to be our candidate to be our state's next lieutenant governor. There is no one I know who is better equipped for this moment to serve as our state's next lieutenant governor. She's seen it firsthand on the streets. She has law enforcement in her blood, in her heart. She stands for law and order and public safety, and I'm confident that with a lieutenant governor like Allison Esposito, I will have a partner in Albany who understands exactly how to prevent cases just like this. It would have been one less rape in the state of New York. Allison.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are again. Here we are again, standing for those who can't stand for themselves. Here we are again, representing the innocent victims of the state of New York that are losing their lives and being tortured as a result of reckless policies. Here we are again, talking about data points. No, we're not talking about data points, Governor Hochul. We're talking about victims. This was a horrific crime, and it could have been avoided. It could have been avoided. Governor Hochul wants to talk about data points. We want to talk about victims. The victims are the data points. Their family and friends are the data points. We're talking about people. Governor Hochul puts power before people, and it's time we put an end to that. This is absolutely one of the worst crimes I've seen, and I'm a cop. And I was a domestic violence cop and sergeant for a period of time. You know what it's like to have a victim look into your eyes and say, you can't protect me? Because the laws aren't protecting them? Because law enforcement is shackled, or our judicial and criminal justice system is shackled and apologizing for itself by releasing perpetrators back on the street to re-victimize? You have any idea what an empty feeling that is as a cop? I can't imagine what it feels like as a judge when you have an individual like Saracena who has decades worth of arrests in horrible domestic violence cases. His ex-wife, he beat more than an estimated 200 times. Once with a steel-toed boot, kicking her so hard he ruptured her spleen. Arrested and released, he goes on to rape a woman. But it wasn't just a rape. He dragged her across state lines, beating her so badly in the car that her jaw was broken multiple times. He stabbed her with an ice pick, put her in the trunk, then dragged her outside of the car and raped her. He served time and was released on parole. He was released, but we know his history. When a judge looked at this case in February, and it was a domestic harassment stalking charge, anyone could see what was going to happen next. Just by looking at this man's history, anyone could see that he was going to do it again. We released him to do it again. Our government's number one job is to protect its people, and it's failing miserably. They released him to do it again. He wasn't allowed to set bail, and Saracena was let back onto the street. She was given an order of protection, but what does that matter if when he violates it 2 times after that, we're going to do nothing about it? It's just paper. Empty promises to victims who are suffering. We're going to do nothing about it. And the criminals know it. And released again to reoffend 2 more times. Finally, yet another data point, our 4th victim that we're talking about, and there have been multiple others. Yet again, another data point of a woman who was held against her will and raped. It didn't have to happen. Government's number one job, number one priority is to protect its people. And we now exist in a New York State government that is protecting criminals, emboldening them to do whatever they want with no consequences. It's enough.
I am so sick of standing here and looking at the pain in victims' eyes. I am so sick of looking at family members and saying that we have failed you. I am sick of calling on Albany elected officials that are clueless and spineless to do the right thing. I now call on the people of the state of New York to stand with us, to stand with common sense, to stand with victims, to stand against criminals. Come out. Let your voices be heard. November 8th is Election Day, and it is time. It is time. This is not a red wave. This is a common sense wave. Republicans, Democrats, independents, and people who have never voted before are standing with us. All over this state we hear it. This is unacceptable. Governor Hochul, you need to be fired. You're failing to do your job. And come November 8th, I'm confident that the people of the state of New York will let you know that. Thank you.
So are you going to say a few words?
Sure.
Yeah, Joe Pinion, Republican nominee for U.S. Senate, running against Chuck Schumer. We're here, as Allison said, once again, because the needs of the criminal have been elevated over the responsibility to the common man and the common people. You can say what you want about what happens at the state level, but we know that walls of government, they allow things to go back and forth. And what has happened at the state level starts in Washington, D.C. Started with the three most dangerous words ever uttered in modern politics: defund the police. Now, my opponent, Chuck Schumer, he has done nothing. He has said nothing to quell this wildfire that has now spread across this country, spread across this state like a cancer, metastasizing and consuming everything that it finds in its path. You look at how we got here with bail reform. It starts with a young black man by the name of Khalif Browder, a young man who was put behind bars far too young for far too long, and as a result of the trauma of a crime for which he was accused of that he never even committed, he ends up taking his own life. And we set forth to make sure that there would never be another Khalif Browder, that we would not allow his death to be in vain. But there is a road of unintended consequences when you shackle the people who are supposed to be the stewards of our laws, when you make it impossible for those people who raise their hands to keep violence at bay from doing their job. And we see it here before us now. We're here in Buffalo. We're getting ready to leave here and go to Rochester. Two cities that are very similar to my hometown of Yonkers. High concentrations of black and brown people looking to pursue their American dream. High concentrations of poverty. The three-strand cord of despair that is crippling the American dream. Lack of educational opportunity. Lack of resources that drives the poverty. And the poverty plus lack of education that drives the crime. And what is Chuck Schumer doing about this? What is Kathy Hochul doing about this? They're coming up with new boogeymen every day. They tell the black parent that they shouldn't be concerned about the fact that children are being shot on their way to school because there is a bigger boogeyman called the white supremacist. That's the real enemy, and only they can protect you. It's a con. They go and tell the woman who has been raped that there are bigger threats to democracy than her personal safety. There are people who have an R next to their name on a ballot. That's the real threat to her liberty. I'm here to tell you that it's not. Safety and security. It's in the bedrock of this nation. It's the first obligation that we have to the people that call this state and this nation home. We have forsaken that obligation. You go from city to city. We have seen 12 major cities across this nation hit all-time highs for homicide. Chuck Schumer does nothing, he says nothing. New York City shootings went up 90%, homicide went up 30%. Rochester, New York, right down the road, now wears the crown for having more murder per capita than Chicago, Illinois. What is the response to all of this? Nothing. Silence. And so it is up to the people to take their power back. I stand with Lee Zeldin because I know that he will prioritize the needs of the people over the power of government. I stand with Allison Esposito because he quite literally walked away from the job of keeping people safe, because he recognized that those who had raised their hand to do so are now no longer given the latitude to execute their oath and their responsibility. It's black and brown communities that bear the brunt of this neglect, sponsored by government. At the height of COVID in New York City, 100% of the people that were shot and killed were black and brown victims. It is a scourge that is crippling this state, it is crippling this nation. And so we have work to do to let people know that whether you are left of Bernie Sanders or whether you are right of Donald Trump, irrational violence will find you when the people who have been placed in charge with the stewardship of this state pretend that your safety is an afterthought, that it should be placed on the back burner. And so I want to thank the press for coming here to cover this, because people need to know that their eyes are not lying to them, that yes, in fact, their communities are not as safe, that black bodies were used as cannon fodder to make sure that the people on the left could win an election, and all they think they can do for justice, like my opponent Chuck Schumer, is to go down to Washington, D.C. in the Capitol Rotunda, kneel in kente cloth, and say that he feels your pain. Tell that to the woman who's been raped by a man who has no business being on the street. Tell that to the mother who's had to bury their child long before they were ever supposed to be placed in that position. Tell that to all the parents, the fathers, all across this state of all colors, all creeds, whose last image of their child is a toe tag and a body bag. This is abnormal. Nothing about this is normal. And on Election Day, November 8th, we have the opportunity to say that we will not accept the abnormal as normal anymore. So when I thank you for coming to cover this, I want to encourage all the people who see this, that we are with you, that we stand with you, that your community should not be a killing field, that your living room should not be a shooting gallery. And with your help and with your support, we place our hearts in your hands. We ask you to place your trust in ours, to do something you've never perhaps thought you would ever do, to vote for people with an R next to their name. There's no R in my blood. Just one heartbeat for this nation, for my country, for my community. Let's get this job done together. Let's heal together. And let the people who preach division and bring it to your doorstep, let them know that their day has come. Thank you so much.
The two charges in March, the criminal contempt charges, those were both bail eligible. Are you concerned that despite having discretion, the judge still allowed Saracena out on bail?
In March, that was pre-budget. So the change that would have made it bail eligible didn't take place until after the budget had passed. There isn't a knock on a judge not doing his or her job. In this particular case, the judge did not have discretion. When the tweak was made to the bail laws in the budget, this is one of the many examples you could provide of where they didn't go far enough. Why wouldn't the judge have discretion even at that point, once the budget passes, to be able to have this person remanded? But it wasn't retroactive.
So to clarify, that didn't go into effect until April.
Until after the budget passed, correct?
So if the argument is, well, we made that tweak, the argument back is, well, you should have made it retroactive so that people who weren't
That's
remanded
just
before.
one part of it. The other part of it is he was arrested in February And that wasn't bail eligible then, and that's not bail eligible today. So nothing with their change to the bail laws impacted at all the ability of a judge to be able to do something about the charges in February.
Would he have, how likely is it that even under the previous rules before the initial bail reform, that he would have still been in custody based on those charges?
So we have to give judges discretion on the individual case to weigh dangerousness and flight risk, past criminal record, seriousness of the offense. I often hear people advocate for the dangerousness standard. And that's something that Mayor Adams has spoken to, the dangerousness standard. And I agree that there should be a dangerousness standard, but when you hear me talk about the need to repeal cashless bail, I always talk about how judges need discretion to weigh dangerousness, flight risk, past criminal record, and seriousness of the offense. And in this particular case, I can't speak for every judge in the state of New York because not every judge might look at it the same way. I believe that in overhauling cashless bail, another dynamic that needs to be looked at is what qualifies for mandatory pretrial confinement. We just had a case where somebody was released after punching one cop and attempting to bite another cop. In that particular fact pattern, there could be a decision made to release that person back out on the street. I would argue that there should be mandatory pretrial confinement when you are assaulting law enforcement. That's just one example. I believe that there are cases where mandatory pretrial confinement should be the norm, and judges should be given discretion for where they can set cash bail. But releasing somebody on cash bail should be the rare exception, not the norm. And it's all based on the facts of the case. But in this particular case, what the judge, this particular judge would have done in February in this case, I mean, I know what I would do because of what happened with his past record. He is someone who should be remanded. He should not be released on cashless bail. If I was a judge and I was given discretion in that case in February, I would not release him on cashless bail, period. As far as the judge in this case, I would have to defer to what that judge would decide. But that's what I would decide.
So we've got people calling us all the time claiming that this is just a big political issue and it has nothing to do with bail reform. So I'm going to read you something and have you respond to it. Historically, the entire purpose of bail was to assure someone's return back to court. It was never about how dangerous they were. It was never about charges. It was how much money are we going to ask them to put in security to ensure that they're going to come back to court. When bail reform went into effect, they changed that a little bit and codified it, indicating if the judge is going to set bail, if the judge is empowered to set bail, she has to consider the least restrictive amount of bail to ensure their appearance back in court. That does not mean that the judge can't set a high amount of bail, and it does not mean that the judge can't remand under certain circumstances. Is that true? Does the judge have that option to set bail?
So right now with the law in New York, it depends on the offense. It depends on the circumstances as to whether or not the judge has discretion to be able to set bail. In this particular case, when the rearrest takes place in February, the judge doesn't have discretion no matter what to set bail.
No matter what, even before the bail reform, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying under the current law.
Under the current law?
Yeah. Even after the tweak that was made in the state budget in April, if this entire case was to happen again now for the first time, if the February arrest was to take place on September 1st, the judge still wouldn't have discretion to set bail. I believe that judges should have discretion to be able to set bail in cases like this. That's the simplest explanation of what I believe. In overhauling cashless bail, there are a few components of this. One is what the law from Albany states, another is what the judge does about it, because we also have had issues in other cases where judges have discretion to set bail, in cases where the prosecutor asks for bail and the judge decides to let the person go. So we also have the story of the Goldman Sachs employee who was shot on a subway in Staten Island. In that case, the prosecutor asked for bail, but the judge released the person anyway, went on to murder someone, the Goldman Sachs employee. A few weeks ago, there was a story of the Times Square slasher, made national news. Well, in that case, a judge in Queens had released that person previously. The prosecutor had asked for bail, but the judge released the person anyway, went on to commit the additional offense. We have issues in this state with some district attorneys who refuse to enforce the law. We're seeing that most recently with the Bronx district attorney, where in that particular case, you have a person who's out on a parole, a convicted sex offender, puts on a glove. This glove was a weapon. This wasn't a regular glove. It's all on video, ends up knocking Jesus Cortez into a coma. And the NYPD puts their facts together. They recommend an attempted murder charge that the Bronx district attorney reduces to misdemeanor assault and harassment. And then that person gets released back out onto the streets while his victim is sitting in a coma. And I would say, as far as intent goes, you, just by putting on that glove, which is a weapon, and then punching the guy, yeah, you have intent. That should be an element that I would say is easily proven. So all of these are this is all part of the discussion of what's going wrong right now with the criminal justice system in the state, with pro-criminal laws that are getting passed. I believe that cashless bail should be overhauled and judges should be given discretion to weigh all of these factors. You're talking about an ability to pay, and that's why I pointed out earlier that if we were only talking about somebody committing a low-level offense, no prior record, they're not a flight risk, they're not a danger, and the only reason why they would be stuck behind bars is because they cannot afford $100 in bail, that is an example that we're all on the same page with. That's why we're saying give judges discretion. But what's actually happening is the case of the person who gets busted with $1.2 million worth of crystal meth. I would argue that if you're busted with $1.2 million worth of crystal meth and you don't have money to pay your bail, that's on you. You're a bad criminal, you're a bad businessman, you're a bad drug dealer. That does not fit the description of the best argument in favor of cashless bail.
Separate from bail reform, how do you make orders of protection protect survivors of domestic violence better? Because that's been an issue for years, and this guy in this case from here, at least one of the victims had one out against him, right?
This is it's an issue that I would always look first to law enforcement, asking law enforcement what they need, asking district attorneys, prosecutors what they need, speaking to victims counsel as far as what they need. In local communities, some law enforcement better equipped than others. Not all prosecutors are the same in this state. Not all services for domestic violence victims are the same throughout this entire state. Investing in education and prevention and treatment with regards to domestic abuse, that is an investment that is worth making. We have some great entities that exist in this state that do a great job for the local community. There is not one simple one-size-fits-all bill where you could just pass a bill and then all of a sudden no one's going to ever have another issue with no order of protection case. It's case by case. And I would also add on top of it is the victim impact dynamic. See, you look at the Saracena case, he gets released. Allison laid out the facts of what happened with prior convictions. And whenever decisions are made in any case, where a parole board is releasing a cop killer, a murderer, a rapist, there needs to be more of a consideration of victim impact. The story is best told of these victims often. In many of these cases, the person they do know more about the person who committed that act on them. And unfortunately, the system right now within the parole board, they are releasing people without giving adequate consideration to victims and victims' families. All of this is part of how to better deal with domestic abuse situations. And I would look at it that way as opposed to saying, what do we do about challenges related to orders of protection? I think that if we were doing more to combat domestic abuse, domestic violence, increasing the investment in the services, giving law enforcement what they need, making sure that DAs are enforcing the law, making sure that the parole board is considering victims' rights in their testimony. All of that collectively all adds up to help also deal with the issue as it relates to orders of protection.
Switching topics real quick, thousands, the Erie County thinks 2,000 in less than a month, all over the state, really, people lining up to get their pistol permits ahead of today's change. Your thoughts on that many people kind of flooding the clerk's offices, and do you expect the governor to say, too bad, these rules aren't grandfathered in?
In many respects, your question is totally on topic. There are people who feel like they cannot, there's people who don't feel safe. We could travel to parts of the state where you go down to New York City. We took a field trip. You'll hear from people who either don't ride the subway anymore, and you could talk to others when they do ride the subway, they hug a pole or they grab a guardrail because they're afraid of being pushed in front of an oncoming subway car. You look at crime in Rochester, where we're going to next, rising crime numbers in Syracuse. There's also smaller communities where they're experiencing rising crime, but they don't really have a big media presence. So there's so much coverage of what's going on inside of a bigger city that these smaller towns aren't even getting the coverage. The reality is right now that New Yorkers don't feel safe. Now, someone else could say, on the subway example, oh, that's ridiculous. I'll ride the subway's fine. Well, that's good that you feel that way. But all these other people don't feel that way. You can say, well, I don't need a firearm to protect myself. Okay, that you're entitled to that opinion. But I think it's very telling as far as where we are right now in this state, that there are so many New Yorkers who want to carry solely to defend themselves. We're talking about all across this state, New Yorkers who are law-abiding New Yorkers who want to safely and securely carry a firearm solely for self-defense. I think the governor should be interested in knowing that so many people don't feel safe right now, and she should be doing more to deal with it.
Okay, thanks
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
I just have a question for